As a chef, I know flavor doesn't begin in the kitchen. It begins on the land. And Westhome's nature-led Australian Wagyu is a story written in the landscape of Northern Australia. Cooking is storytelling, and Westhome Wagyu carries a story of Northern Australia itself. Raw, powerful, and deeply authentic. It's a testament to the passion and care raised in the rhythm of Northern Australia. I'm Chef Maylin from 88 Club in Los Angeles, and I invite you to visit westhome.com/Maylin to learn more. And taste a story only Westhome nature-led Australian Wagyu can tell. That's westhome.com/MEILIN.
Now streaming. Disney Plus invites you to go behind the scenes with Taylor Swift in an exclusive 6-episode docuseries.
I wanted to give something to the fans that they didn't expect. The only thing left is to close the book.
The end of an era. And don't miss Taylor Swift, The Eras Tour, the final show, featuring for the first time the Tortured Poets Department. Now streaming, only on Disney Plus.
I think that the answer to that question is really simple. It's either going to end humanity in 10 years or it's going to make it the best time to be alive ever. And
if we have enough electricity.
Right.
Taking a minute to be myself, don't need no help. We keep on rising.
Okay, welcome back to Unlocking Commerce and Business. So I'm your host, Connie Davis, and this is the place where real voices and real missions and real conversations meet. As you've seen in the audience, and thank you all for listening, every episode of this show is really meant to be a handshake. It's really meant to be me saying there are amazing people, humans out there doing work, builders and change agents and truth tellers. And my job is I literally pull up a chair, I sit here, I get out of the way, and I elevate these voices and amplify missions of founders that you're going to hear from today. Because commerce has always begun and been from a place of human to human, and it's trust that's built long before any type of revenue or transaction takes place. So I want the audience today, that any of you that are listening, to think about something different today for a moment. Think about what happens in your home and your business and your community when lights go out. Not just the inconvenience of it, but what stops and how commerce stops. The refrigerator with the food, the equipment that keeps someone's livelihood or even their health running, the small business that can't process out of their home office. And so there's a lot of those types of blocks and barriers that we've talked about in different forms on this show. And we keep setting the stage for systemic gaps. We talked about that in season 1. We're now in season 2, where the places where infrastructure is really meant to support people has failed them. And it's not even reaching them in the first place. So we're going to dive into season 2 today with another show I'm really excited about. We're going to get closer to home, though, for you today, the listener, because we're going to talk about energy today. And today's guests are exactly the builders and the innovators and the change makers that I am so passionate to lift up and amplify their voices and their missions. So John Carey and Lester Kraft, and welcome to the show. You guys are the co-founders of OvaNova, a company that's quite literally unlocking the flow of energy from the sun. And you're doing something that I deeply believe in, and that is meeting people where they are and building something that lasts. So today's conversation is going to sit at the heart of clean energy. We're going to talk about community resilience a little bit and the future of commerce with energy. So let's get started. So John and Lester, welcome, and thank you for being here with me today.
Thanks for having us on, Connie.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation. So welcome to the show. So we're going to start here with the origin. I want to talk a little bit about, I want you both to take us back to the beginning, when the moment was that you knew communities needed a different relationship with energy.
Well,
It was like 12 years ago.
yeah, we were looking at the community being the whole world, and we just heard this story about Mother Teresa, like going hardcore, and like why she was so hardcore. And she was like hardcore because she was all about service. like really trying to help people, and it just allowed you to go further. And John and I had been fortunate to spend our entire early years working together in an entrepreneurship and leadership training program. And we were ready to serve at a higher level. So we asked ourselves, like, what's the best thing we can imagine doing for people? Like, what's the biggest problem we could solve? So Mother Teresa was trying to solve world hunger. She was trying to solve big problems. She didn't do that, but she accomplished quite a lot by focusing on really big problems to solve. So we thought, what's the biggest problem we could think of? And we thought, eventually the sun's going to burn out. Do you remember being in second grade, Connie, and hearing about that and being disturbed the first time you heard that the sun was going to burn out? Or is that a weird experience?
Well, that I heard that story, actually, Lester. I don't know if I was growing up in a bubble or what, but I mean, as I started thinking about like the power of the sun and, you start studying the universe and the stars that explode, I think that's probably what was more fearful for me. But tell us the rest of what you're thinking about, because I'm sure other people have heard that statement, and it's kind of scary to think about.
Yeah, well, before the sun burns out, it'll boil all the oceans on the earth first. So we're cooked either way, but we should have a little bit of time to figure this out. And it's not like John and I thought we're going to be the ones to figure out how to keep the sun from reversing, but we thought it's up to us to think of the biggest problem that we can think of and then figure out what would society have to be in order to be able to figure out how to keep the sun from burning out. How advanced would we have to become scientifically? How well would we have to function together as a unit of humans? Like, how much would we have to want to see other people live? How much would we have to want to see other people thrive to even take on that level of challenge, right? And then we tried to build organizations for a long time, and eventually the organizational trust always seemed to break down whenever people started thinking about themselves and what's the least I can do to get the most for me. And so then we started thinking, well, why is it that people think that that's smart to do as little as we can to get the most for ourselves? And it makes sense logically in a world where you can run out. It makes sense to have more if it's possible to run out. So then we started asking, well, what's it possible to run out of? And the first thing we all say is money. And then you're like, well, why do you need that? Well, you need that to transact currently to be able to access a gallon of oil that you can burn, because oil is only transacted in dollars. So if we're looking at just dollars. And then we thought, it sure would be nice if everybody could work together really well and they weren't focused on money, but had a really clear idea that if we just have more energy, things get a lot better. So would you agree that things are kind of wild right now in America? We seem to be kind of split apart and yelling at each other. And even with all that going on, do you think it's better for us than it was in the 1850s for a whole bunch of Americans, at least?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
imagine walking out. Go ahead.
We have conveniences. We got all kinds of, distractions and fun and entertainment, way different than the days spent working all day.
Yeah. And have you ever thought, I mean, you don't have to go outside to use the bathroom in an outhouse. You have running water, like sweat to death in the summertime. Exactly what you're saying. And have you ever thought about the connection between all those conveniences and being able to access energy?
Where does it come from?
Well,
Who provides it?
I mean that, let's do this. Look around you real quick. Play a fun game. Tell me one thing you'd be seeing if oil hadn't been burned. Take your time. Just look around the office or your home.
But so many things come from oil, like so many products and goods and, things that get turned into other things come from oil or, I don't know.
Do you see anything in your office that would be there if it hadn't been brought there by a vehicle?
Pretty small list.
Do you see anything? This isn't a hypothetical rhetorical question.
Light.
Okay. So light meaning streaming in from the window?
Like natural. Natural light.
I wouldn't count that as a thing, but photons are technically things. So that's very smart of you to come up with that. I'm talking about physical objects.
No, I don't think so.
There's nothing, right? So that's what I'm saying is that all the things that we work and want and try to get money to get, there's an invisible cost of energy embedded in every one of those items. And there will be as long as there's a cost to energy. So that was a really long, convoluted story to say that if we want to create a society that works well enough together to be able to take on supermassive problems like keeping the sun from burning out, a fundamental issue to solve is energy, because energy is the ability to do work. And if you're going to make things better, it's going to require work. Not all work makes things better, but nothing gets better without work. That requires energy, more work, more ability to get things done to make the world better for everybody. So that's one way to tell our entry story.
Yeah. I think it's a powerful way, and it actually aligns, Lester, really well with when I talk about, some of the disadvantaged communities that don't have the real time to really, the energy inside themselves to really even process what's happening because they're out trying to, keep the roof over their heads, keep the lights on. Those are all phrases that we hear a lot in some of the communities that I do a lot of work with. And I know that you have a very strong humanitarian type of purpose-driven path with OvaNova and what you guys are trying to do. And in the same kind of context of it, a lot of people, when they think of, kind of generating energy from the sun, they think of it as a home improvement project. And how is what you guys are doing so fundamentally different from that? You're not just a solar company. You're so much more than that. Can you take us through a little bit more of that, like that origin story and how you've morphed into this mission side?
Yeah, so our mission is to add as much value as possible to as many lives as possible. So as soon as possible. We chose energy because it's a rising tide that rises up all the ships. And because our mission was to add as much value as possible to as many lives as possible, and because we saw energy as a way to do it, the first thing that we had to figure out how to do was how to get the message out to people that producing their own power was something they could do in a way they could hear it. And when we first got into solar, we saw that people were not able to hear that message from people knocking on their doors. Not very well. Created a lot of confusion and a lot of resentment. So we just thought, well, we got to have these conversations, and we'd like to do it in a way where there was trust involved so we could have real conversations. So who do people trust? So when you think about your community, Connie, like what kind of groups or organizations or activities do people give their time to for free?
Human services, volunteering with kids in schools, church. They volunteer, food pantries, feeding the homeless, those types of projects.
Right. And so John and I said, we're not going to say what's good and what adds value, but we definitely believe that when people get together and they're willing to get together for nothing, they think that's good. They think that's worth supporting. And we noticed that those organizations like Little League sports teams, churches, schools, bands, robotics clubs. Do you have any relatives that are in those things and are always asking you for money during fundraisers? Like, hey, will you buy a cookie dough or chocolate bar?
Yeah. I mean, most of the time it's local youth groups or whatever that are trying to practice their salesman skills and learn how to, network and connect with people and practice their communication skills. And they get usually lifted up to get out in the community and go door to door or to have those types of presentations.
Wow, you must live in a really nice community if people are upscaling themselves. Where I'm from, we just sold wrapping paper, magazine subscriptions to get our school fundraiser done. But anyway, it might have been a bad question to ask. Do you remember school fundraisers growing up, though? Watching the cars. And we just thought the solar industry is going to spend billions of dollars on marketing. And that seems like a huge waste whenever it could be put to a better purpose, especially if there's people in communities using energy that have things they trust that always need money. And so we thought, wouldn't it be cool to take the marketing dollars that are going to be wasted and be more resourceful with them? So that even if nobody ever buys anything from us, it's impossible for us to fail because from the very beginning, we made an impact on organizations that people like. So by choosing to take what other companies called marketing and turning it into a social impact fund, what we did was we went to the churches, schools, and nonprofits and said, we'd love to have conversations with people about solar, figure out what they know about it, what they don't know, why they're using it. And for sending people to those conversations, we'll make a donation, even if nobody buys anything. So, Connie, if you had a son or a daughter that was trying to raise money for school and they invited you to come to a Zoom meeting, we would make a contribution to the school just because you showed up to learn. And what do you think that would do? Can you imagine if you were online, instead of talking to a door-to-door salesman, if you were talking to people who'd made a contribution to your school that made it really easy for you to raise funds compared to a car wash? How would you show up at that meeting with friends, more or less open-minded than
Well, way
with
more
this?
open, but that goes back to the heart of what commerce is, and that's the exchange of value. And I think that that's a big area for us to reimagine. And I love that you did that and you turned it into a kind of a social impact. How can we educate you and, still exchange some information that's valuable, and then they can act on it if they want to. I love that, though. It's a great model.
Yeah, thank you. So if you're going to add as much value as possible to as many lives as possible, as soon as possible, then every dollar matters, starting with the marketing dollar. So instead of paying Facebook and Google, we chose to, John, you're going to show her this thing?
No,
You just
I
pulled
was
it up.
I was just looking up. We did this with a lot of schools and nonprofits, and it's not pulling up. But I was just gonna read a testimonial from a band that used our service. This is a band that used our service. So thank you, OvaNova. This is just one of the many fundraisers we did for the wonderful opportunity you provided for our band students at AC Reynolds High School by allowing us to fundraise through your organization. Through your generosity, our students raised over $8,000 to go to Los Angeles, California to perform at Festival Disney. The cost of this trip is very expensive and has been a financial sacrifice for our students. Many would have not been able to attend this trip without this opportunity. One of our students actually funded her entire trip through OvaNova. It is the easiest fundraiser we've ever had. Our parents were thrilled that no one had to buy or sell anything. They just had to listen to a pressure-free presentation about solar energy. The whole experience has been amazing. Thank you for being so easy to work with and for your commitment to supporting your community. So that's how we found our customers across 27 states in the U.S. is just by working with community organizations. And the mechanics of that are really simple. It was $25 donation for 25 minutes of somebody's time. And what we found is that people would come for 25 minutes, but because there were 10 or so people from their robotics team asking questions, it turned into 2 hours of people just being curious about renewable energy and of course wanting a quote. And of course that is what kind of led us to our journey of where we are today, is just serving. Well, when somebody is curious and they want to go to the next step, how do we make that next step high quality and the highest level of service? So
Yeah, I love that. And it's an immersive experience too. And that's something else I talk about, is that just giving folks the chance to sit in a kind of a trusted location. You mentioned church or school. They spend a lot of time there already. And to be able to immerse and learn something that actually comes with human delivery versus reading something on the internet or watching a YouTube video that you don't know if you're getting facts or not. So I think that's a really good example of human to human exchange. And that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, we just did it all online. The connection to the church was just that they went there and the church needed support.
Yeah. Yeah.
people trust sit at home in front of their computers.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think it's a great example of, doing something creative, creating impact and awareness. And that's what it's going to take to really, restore the flow of energy between humans and then into the community. Can we talk about some of the biggest barriers that are keeping communities, especially rural and underserved ones, from accessing clean energy? Like, what would you say to that if you were to really elevate like the top 3 things that are the barriers? I'm sure that comes up a lot, and how are you working to kind of diffuse or break those down?
Well, since the one big beautiful bill, most of what I would share is less true. But before that, when there were tax credits in place for residences, and I would say that the biggest thing is just education, which is why we focused on that. People just haven't really thought, am I going to use electricity until the day that I die? Oh, I am. Okay. Well, anything that I'm going to use forever does that make sense to rent that or to own it? Most people choose to own their cars and own their homes because they're going to sleep somewhere every night and they're going to transport themselves on a daily basis. And so it's just things we decide to own. And then it just comes down to, well, okay, well, then it's something I can afford. Well, $80,000 is a whole lot of dollars. Well, it's pretty simple when you break that up over 30 years with no down payment. It looks very similar to what your never ending, always escalating electricity bill is. So the big barrier for the last decade in our experience is just people have no idea or hadn't even thought that they could generate their own power. It's pretty common sense to think if you don't like your public school system, you could go to a private school or homeschool. If you don't like the food sold in Food Line or the grocery store, you can always grow it at home. But people hadn't really made the connection, at least in our experience, that they could generate their own power and that it was reliable and that it was affordable. And so I would say the biggest one is that. And then you get into some of the aspects of, well, if you don't have great credit, you can't access that 30-year loan, and so, but electricity is one of those things that people are going to pay, and so I think that the financing mechanisms, once people have been educated and had a system designer that had the ability to understand the variables at play to be able to build something that made sense for them, which oftentimes in our experience, the service providers in the industry of solar and storage were primarily designing systems that served them in their ability to communicate the value to the customer, but weren't necessarily built with the customer's best interests in mind.
Yeah, a lot easier to tell somebody if you buy this solar, you're going to save $10 a month over your electricity bill than to explain to them that solar without batteries doesn't work even if the sun is up during the day when the power lines are down. Or to explain to somebody how smart load shedding works, or to help somebody understand how to size a battery, or. Those are deeper conversations that require trust to go deep enough into. So what John just said is the entire industry was set up around sales based on interconnection agreements in certain areas with financing that made it easy for people that didn't really understand what they were talking about to have conversations that led to transactions.
Right.
Solar was a transactional business. And you ask about rural areas, it's a relationship place. It's not a transactional place. Like what people ask in areas where we install out in rural America is, have y'all done any projects like this around here? Because if I can't see it with my own eyes, I don't believe it. Right. And all people in rural America have seen is their farmland getting taken up by giant solar developers who realize how inexpensive the land is because these areas have been left out of progress for the last 40 years. I'm at my parents' house right now, Connie, and we just got internet here in 2024 on high-speed internet on February 29th, 2024. And so it's all local trust. And who the heck was going to learn how to do something if it's just all these liberals talking about climate change and calling these people they're just trying to do their best some type of phobic? Like there's the most exclusive thing ever, the way that rural communities were treated. There was no inclusion of rural communities in the clean energy movement other than coming and raping our land. So,
solar fields.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's not unlike what we see I'll go to the nonprofit space. We talk a lot about economic justice, and energy insecurity is rarely talked about as an economic justice issue, but it absolutely is. If I can't, pay my, and utility support and supplementation or subsidy is one of the top issues that people call into these resource lines like 211 to ask for assistance is utility assistance. And that is a budget that nonprofits in communities are constantly doing vouchers for, is to help with rising energy costs. But that taps into the individuals that are renting homes from landlords that have not created a more economically viable path to being a renter. And, they're renting and they're in apartment homes. So how does this land with you guys when you think about this instability or inaccessible power from an economic mobility side for these individuals that are maybe lower income workers, can't really get. Are you doing things or collaborating in ways that can bring that energy more sustainably to organizations or housing projects that house these individuals that are truly renting?
No, those are the kind of programs that trillions of dollars are wasted on to do a very minor amount of good, and we try to do things that actually work.
Yeah, I think that that's an area of a gap, and we talk about systemic gaps all the time. And I think that there's an area of focus that, if we think about the revolving door inside of the nonprofit community for utility support, for them to pay their electric bill, and they're living in the housing situations that they are, affordable housing, workforce housing, all of the things, that those two problems go hand in hand.
They do.
Affordable
But
housing.
what I'm hearing you say is that people are really struggling to pay their electric bill, and evidence of that is reaching out to these support groups, nonprofits, to say that. And that a lot of times the people that are living there, even if they don't own their home, energy is a problem for them. It's an economic justice issue. And I would say it's a generational thing. Like if you're poor, if you grow up poor, your mom and dad yell at you when you leave the lights on, leave the door open. It's a big deal because you're wasting money. As you progress up the socioeconomic ladder, energy becomes less of a burden and you don't notice it as much anymore. It's just an auto payment. And it's kind of a point of pride to not have to worry about your electricity bill. You're worrying about bigger things like your house addition or your insurance or whatever it is.
An investment property.
Your investment property, like energy. Oh, that's just always going to be there. All I have to do is pay for it. I have money. I can pay for it. No big deal. So what you're pointing to is the canary in the coal mine. And what I'm suggesting is those people who can't afford electricity, that's about to expand to such a massive percentage of the population that there's not a nonprofit in the world that's going to be able to support that. Well,
That's why I'm raising the issue, because these are the types of things that when we can't work on them in siloed areas. That's the thing. There's so much fragmentation over some of these issues that, it's a part of the conversation I wanted to have with you all because of the rural alignment, the energy conversation and education that's needed. But there's only so far that some of these communities can go because they have these other characteristics, and there's intersections of, blocks and barriers that collide at some place, and then they can't get past them.
Right. You know what's really great about rural communities? Giant rooftops. And people who have time to have conversations about how things work, and people who know how to put things together sort of intuitively. Still a lot of people who work with their hands. And so it's been a blessing to serve these communities, but it is an example of a program that we thought was fantastic. One of the trillions of dollars wasted to do a marginal bit of good that we thought would do a lot of good. A few years back, we found out about this program called the Rural Energy for America program.
Mm-hmm.
And it allowed us to access grant-based funding and tax credit funding to put up microgrids, solar and batteries, smart controls, all in some of these properties with these really big roofs, and create on-demand, push a button, suck some power whenever you need it opportunity for the power companies in the rural areas, which led to us developing some software and giving them a chance to use it, learning about peak energy. And I could go on and on forever, but we didn't get out. I'm from rural America. We found some incentives in rural America that were so overwhelming that it made sense to make those available to people. And if you want to talk about a blocking, then bureaucratic, nonsensical grading measures in the Rural Energy for America program are blocking about $100 million worth of projects right now that should be going up. But between the Biden administration and the new administration, they're all making rules to make it exceptionally difficult to access funds that are allegedly for these areas.
I see. Let's talk about those microgrids, because I wanted to get into kind of the unique lens that you have on the solution for some of these communities. And it comes down to, you mentioned microgrids, there's mobility, and then I know you're doing some innovation. So walk us through, let's get into the education for anybody that's listening that might be in the nonprofit community. This microgrid, what is it, and how do you explain it to a small business owner, a nonprofit or community leader that's never heard of the term?
Well, most people understand the macrogrid.
Mm-hmm. The big power stations and the transfer stations. Yep, we see it and we drive by it, and yeah.
Yeah, and so a microgrid is a grid that can operate independent of the macrogrid. So if you were to just identify some components that might make up a microgrid, one would be a transfer switch to be able to disconnect, just in case there's, some power outage.
Right.
It allows you to safely disconnect, so you're not pushing your energy from your power plant back onto the power lines while people are trying to fix them, hopefully, if the power's out. So that's one aspect of a microgrid, is the ability to island. Another one would be some generation source. It seems like solar makes a lot of sense to incorporate in pretty much every microgrid because sunshine's free. Solar panels are very, very inexpensive, and it's a fuel source that arrives without doing work. Seems like a good one. So we usually incorporate that generation source. We also are pretty firm believers in generators. In this community, not too long ago, there was a massive ice storm, collapsed a lot of buildings, power outages for weeks at a time. During that time, the snow and the ice had covered the solar panels in the community. So without that additional generation source, that microgrid is kind of not useful, right? As soon as the batteries empty themselves and the sun comes up the next day, you don't get to regenerate, if you will.
Yeah. So your plan B is not really a plan B now.
Yeah. So there's different levels of microgrids, but the ones we build are resilient and so therefore have multiple energy inputs. An energy storage component is also a part of a microgrid. And then the final piece would be smart controls. And this allows someone to very efficiently own a microgrid without having to spend a lot of money. And what I mean by this is if you don't have the smart controls to be able to maybe turn off your hot water heater, your oven, your hot tub, your electric vehicle charger, whatever appliances that you have that draw a lot of energy, then you have to overbuild your system. So it's not just, if you want to definitely be able to have coffee in the morning, then you might say, all right, well, I'm just going to go ahead and not charge my electric car right now. So I have enough in my batteries overnight to be able to have coffee in the morning before the sun comes up. And so a microgrid is a combination of those technologies: ability to generate power, ability to store power, and then the ability to control power intelligently. And this allows a facility to be able to access energy, whether the grid is present or not. But it also allows the facility to be a support system for the macrogrid. And this is something that OvaNova has gotten very nerdy about over the last half decade, is understanding the problems that our electric grid is facing, which are quite dire. And that what I just said doesn't really connect with most people, Connie, because for most people, they flip the lights on and they work great. And for most people I know, their electricity bill is something they're aware of, but usually on auto pay. And probably more importantly, I just don't know very many people that know even what a unit of energy is called or what they pay per unit of electricity. I mean, 9 out of 10 people could not tell me but you know what your gallon of gas costs, right?
Right.
You know, it's a gallon.
Because you're using it, you're interacting with it on a regular basis.
And so that microgrid, if somebody were to own a microgrid, it creates a ton of value monetarily speaking if they can offer the utility company extra energy when they really, really need it. And that's a different conversation for a different time, but I would say that is an aspect of a microgrid in my definition. It is able to support the macrogrid.
Yeah, and I know, I mean, there's so many details here to go into some of these nuts and bolts of really the solutions that you all have built. The reason I brought up the microgrid is because it's an alternative to what we've always known. And I think that people get really ingrained in the day-to-day. You mentioned the gas. I'm always putting gas in my car. If I want to go somewhere, I run out. I have to make time in my schedule. But making time to have a conscious awareness of what is the cost of the unit of energy. If it's on autopilot and it's kind of set and forget and I'm never thinking about it, we think about it here in Florida all the time because we have hurricanes and we have power outages and we have wind that comes through with the hurricanes that knocks the power out. And so most of the homeowners have a generator, they have a backup, and they have learned to prioritize or get ready for those or they just leave, they evacuate and they don't have to deal with it until it's all back on and I can go home and go back to normal. But there are people that do not have those luxuries and privileges. And that is what we see staying behind when, these disasters happen, is the ones that are they fall through the filters. They don't have all of the accommodations and the backup plans. And that's why I wanted to just spend a little bit of time on that microgrid, because with a little bit of planning, a little bit of collaboration, I think that communities can start really thinking about, what does community resilience look like? Not just me and myself and my family. And so I think it's a really important education area that I wanted to capture. So if we think about this, approach to education, and you think about the community activities that you guys have really created, I think something very innovative to have a clean energy for a cause event or a community first type of approach to education. How does that really shape the way that you bring the information in from the various communities? Is it setting up different approaches to how you bring energy to the community based on market, or is this pretty universal and this has really become the fuel for you putting the more of the power solutions out into the community?
I think everything that we've done has been because we listened to what people wanted and the way to deliver it.
Yep.
Like whenever we were working with people in Florida, their rates were so awesome. Like you could just make some energy, send it back to the power grid and get a 1-to-1 credit. So you could send it back at 1 in the afternoon and use it at 10 o'clock at night. So from a financial standpoint, there's no reason for a battery, but if you didn't get a battery, you didn't have power after a hurricane. And we were more focused on, well, what people really want is power after a hurricane, to the point where they're willing to buy generators. And what people really want is to own something that produces something that they're going to use every day for the rest of their life. Can you imagine if you had a refrigerator that just produced its own food, how valuable that would be?
Exactly. Very valuable.
Just like if your fridge grew food, like imagine having a machine that grows your electricity right on top of your house. It's a wild concept. Like it's so far out of the realm of possibility that we could produce our own power that most of us have not asked enough questions. So to answer your question about, did our approach shape us? Yes. And I'll give you a concrete example. We were working with a team in Florida, cheerleading team. They wanted some new pom-poms or to go to a competition. I don't know what we were helping raise money for, but I remember a young lady who had an uncle in Ohio, and the uncle in Ohio got on for the Florida teammate. And then he ended up wanting to go solar, and we started looking into it. And we're like, oh my God, the rules are completely different here. They don't just you can't just send power back at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and trade it to get it back at 10 at night. It does not work like that. Unless you use it immediately, all they give you is wholesale for it. So wouldn't it be nice to be able to transport that power through time instead of selling it back for wholesale when you don't need it, to be able to store it so you can avoid retail when you do? So by working in areas that other people weren't willing to work because of where our mission and our education and how easy it was to spread took us, we learned about battery technology several years before most solar companies. And that was a fork in the road that has definitely led to some insurmountable advantages at this point in terms of understanding the technology.
I hear you. And what I'm hearing is there's not a fair value of exchange between the power companies and the energy. I'm sure that's a whole nother topic for another day. The reason I asked the question about listening, and I knew that just having something shape your mission that way and listening into the community is the example of a true innovator and a true builder that has a vested interest in, how do I align my company with the needs of the people that I'm serving. And it's a testament to the integrity and the values that you all have at OvaNova. And I really wanted to, call that out here because it's an example of the types of solution-oriented, human-centered solutions that this show is meant to highlight. And that if one company it's a huge task of what you're taking on as far as energy. That's not an easy problem to solve. And it takes collaboration. And it's just an example of if you guys can do it, how many more organizations can do it just by intention. And we deal with markets that are full of pressure tactics all the time. The transaction matters. Make the money move faster. Make the contract go faster. And what we have seen is an erosion of trust between organizations and thought leaders because we're doing things so fast that we need to slow down. And that's why I asked the question, Lester. So thank you for kind of bearing with me on that answer because I wanted to use it as an example. And I'm going to share a story back in return with you. We sat down about 6 months ago with a nonprofit that serves foster youth, okay, aged out foster youth that are too old for the system to see them, to support them, and they're out on their own, but yet they don't have the knowledge and the infrastructure to really self-sustain themselves. And this organization doesn't really have housing. They don't provide anything direct, but one of the grants that they were able to just get for the sake of getting it was generators. And he said, his comment to us is, I've got these beautiful, huge generators sitting here that sure, they could power my building, but I'm not able to get the funding that I need to support these kids in the places that they live, in the group homes. And the group homes are held and owned by larger companies that don't think about, should I get a generator for my zone? And yet the foster youth are the ones that end up staying in those apartments behind when evacuations like a Hurricane Milton, for example, came through here in Florida. So there's a cycle here, and there's an intent and a need to listen. And that's why I brought up that example.
We've seen people, thank you for sharing that, Connie. There's a fundamental link between human dignity, economic justice, social justice, and the ability to access electricity. When you think about what most people would call a developing nation, what they mean is the lights are off several times a day. If you don't have a firm base of power, you can't consistently build anything. How do you?
And we talk about, Maslow's hierarchy as, that's your map to survival, and, where you're not in survival mode as a human being, and shelter is one of them. Well, you can have shelter, but you can have no power. And, so this is a really important topic for much of the areas and the communities that I immerse in. So I really want to think about, if every community in America had access to what OvaNova offers, and you said you're in 27 states, right? So what changes in 10 years? What do you guys see as far as the vision here? Because I know you've raised money, you continue to grow your company. Where are you guys going? Where are you taking this next as far as this mission and this purpose and the service to the communities you serve?
I have severe doubts about whether or not humanity is going to be here in 10 years.
Well, that's kind of scary.
Well, we've never tried to coexist with something more intelligent than us before, and we're doing that with AI. Now, back that up a notch. I said that to be ha, ha, ha. I kind of mean it. But before we get there, to get AI that smart, we're going to have big AI. Do you know what big AI means?
A lot of energy.
And a lot of energy means that humans like to use energy too, right? Not just computers. And so if we have this thing that's smarter than us, that uses way more energy than us, and the people who run it can pay way more for the power than us, and we're all connected to the same power grid, I don't see how that doesn't present a pretty big potential conflict. Even if you take the machines are smarter than us and the people could pay more out of it, it's just a lot of power we need to make, Connie. We don't have time to build out those nuclear power plants if we're going to race with other countries for winning AI. We have to do things fast. We have to deploy things fast. I'm worried about people losing their jobs, especially white collar workers. I'm wondering about what they can do. So I put all that together to say, what we believe is going to happen is we're going to live in a world where there's extreme energy price increases and shortages, mainly exacerbated by the AI, but even without it, EVs and like American manufacturing.
Yeah, all the things.
Like we are using more than we've ever used, and we're plugging it all in at the same time. And we just didn't get ready for it the last 30 years because we weren't building nuclear power plants like we could have been that whole time. And so that means it is up to us, American citizens, to do something about it ourselves. The small business owners, the individuals raising their hand and saying, I'm willing to produce power for my nation because you know what? I want the AI to have energy because the AI just cured cancer and saved my mom. Hey, I want the AI to have energy because it keeps our nation safe. Wow, everything costs 10 times less because it runs so efficiently. If AI is going to do all the things they say that it's going to do, don't we want to use as much of it as we can? And the answer is yes. Unless it makes our electricity bills too high. Well, that just shows that you're imagining a world where somebody else is always going to make your electricity for you and there's nothing you can do about it. It's a completely disempowered place to be.
It might be worth it to pause for a moment because when Lester and I here, we're going to be feeding a bunch of data centers, a bunch of power. We also, it's like somebody saying, I want to put a hot tub on this deck. And if you built the deck, you know it can't hold that many gallons of water without extra support. And so the pieces that I think are missing from most people's understanding are really simple. One, electricity is one of the very few things, Connie, that the more of it you want to buy, the more it typically costs per unit. Almost anything else, the more of it that you buy, you get a deal, right? Volume discounts.
Right.
But if you're a business and you use a lot of energy, not only do you get charged per unit, but you get charged demand charges for using a lot of it at one time. And in places like California, you can see it very clearly in the rate schedule on your bill. The first couple hundred kilowatt hours is this much per unit. And then when you get to the next batch of kilowatt hours, it's more. And the next batch, it's more, these tiered rate schedules. So it's an odd thing. It's one of the only things I've ever thought of or come across in my life, that the more of it I want to buy per unit, the more it costs. What does that tell me, and should tell anybody who's looking into economics, is that there's not enough.
They don't really want to sell it. If they're raising the price for each additional unit.
There's not enough, right? And this is also made clear by how utility companies invest their money. They're investing their money in remote shutoffs on people's air conditioners and hot water heaters, right? So during peak times, when the power lines are overburdened, they can hit a button and turn off some hot water heaters and air conditioners by paying manufacturers to run on their generators during peak times because they can't run that facility and run everything else. And so we're in a place with our electric grid before AI became on the scene, right? Before manufacturing is being onshored, before EVs have really, really penetrated. Because again, go back to owning a microgrid, Connie. We were meeting with a gentleman this morning who a light went off for him when he realized that his gas station would now be the roof of his home. He was like, oh my gosh, I'm anti-fragile in my ability to transport myself and my fuel is sunshine. Hold on here, So when these things, we just, and you would just say, well, let's just produce more power. But the utility companies know this already, that the transmission lines are already so challenged that we're facing two totally different problems in the same day. In the middle of the day, our solar and wind resources are enough of our energy portfolio where we're actually having to pay the owners of those facilities to disconnect from the grid because there's too much power and we're not using it in the middle of the day. And then as soon as the sun's setting and people are starting to get home from work and cook and plug in their EVs, we're paying people to shut off their hot water heaters, paying manufacturers to to run on their generators. And we're running into such a challenge just on the transmission level that these virtual power plant programs where they're paying people that own batteries and solar that have microgrids to actually pitch in and paying them very handsomely, like very handsomely. So this is another one of those things where if you were wealthy enough to go ahead and buy yourself a microgrid, you get to win even more by paying, by the utility company paying you. So these are, when Lester's talking about AI and the future of energy, like our grid is already antiquated and stressed to the point where it has to be reinvented. And we didn't even get into the distribution side of the energy grid, which is once you get to that substation and you start to feed your churches and your schools and your homes with those power lines. Well, for the last 100 years, as we've sent a circuit out into the country and we've built another home and another home and another business, we've just extended that same power line a little bit further and a little bit further. People who don't understand this might connect with living in a house with a kitchen where you add, like, you got your microwave and you got your toaster oven and you got your coffee pot and then the breaker pops, right? And that's exactly what's going on all over the grid. And so these problems are totally handleable, that we have the technology to handle this, but we don't have the time. It's going to take a decade to be able to make these modifications. And we're trying to plug things in today. And the Department of Energy is predicting multiple hours of blackouts a day in the next few years. And, who do you think that is going to experience those blackouts? You think it's going to be Meta and the data centers? Or do you think it's going to be the folks in the grid edge communities, right?
Yeah, I think it's going to roll downhill for sure.
Yeah. So that's the picture that I think most people are missing, is that the utility companies are having a tough time dealing with all these intermittent renewables. That's a whole new problem they never even dealt with, right? Before solar and wind was a big part of the portfolio of our grid, we just had reliable, stable power that we could turn on and off and scale up and down. But you have a massive solar field and a cloud comes over. That's intermittent and challenging to deal with. And Lester and I recognized this half decade ago and stopped offering solar without storage because of its grid impact. Right. And so this is just a big picture I feel like most folks are missing, and it's just not as simple as we'll just make more power.
Yeah. And I think we're so conditioned too to just, well, we're paying for a service. We need to have an expectation of, a certain level of delivery of that service. And, we've talked about it all through the show today that, your payment is on autopilot or your auto payment, and you don't really think about the cost per unit. You're not really involved in using your energy every single day from a solar, or even just flipping on the light switch. So the last question as we kind of wrap up today, because this has been we've got so much more. We could do a whole nother episode on this, and I really would like to do that, is to dive in a little bit more. But what do you, with the things that the listeners have heard today? So they're sitting in their car, they're driving, most of the time podcasts are on when we're kind of doing a task with electricity and the benefit of all of the convenience that it brings us. What do you want the listener to do after they hear this today? Like, is there one thing that they can start with, and what would you recommend that be?
Pay attention. Like, we're not sitting here making up a fairy tale land of what might happen. Like, a very minimal amount of Googling about AI energy use. Like, where we are regardless of what it does with the jobs, regardless of anything else, when you're building data centers that use more power than cities and you're building hundreds of them and you're making them bigger, we're entering a brave new world, and it's important for humans to be able to access power. And the only way we know we can do that for sure is to produce it ourselves. So I would say that if I were a nonprofit and I had a building and I were looking at community resilience, if I could get my head around the fact that we're probably just a few years away from a few hours a day where there is no power available to our building unless we can make it ourselves, no matter how much we pay for it. Like, that's a real thing that is a probable outcome of the path that we're taking. I would put a microgrid up on my facility to make sure that I can serve my community regardless of what happens with the grid.
What we've noticed about this market specifically is it is totally normal to charge as much as you possibly can based on it's in California. the same microgrid costs 80% more. Sunshine's the same cost. It's free. The equipment's the same cost. While the labor might be a little bit more expensive, the electricity cost is so much more per unit that the market can bear a higher cost microgrid. And so service providers like OvaNova will charge as much as they possibly can to get away with it, which is why they seek areas with high electricity costs and things like this. So I would just say, along with what Lester was saying, is don't wait too long, because the longer you wait, when electricity is really high, which it's coming, and when everybody is trying to access the same services at the same time, it will be almost unattainable for most of America to be able to access it. It will be the big tech companies that are able to continue to pay, and the big business. And so that'd be what Lester was saying, but
act urgently, because if you don't, you might not even be able to get it. And if you can get it, you're going to pay a lot more for it.
Yeah. If we were enrolling people and leaving them touched, moved, and inspired to do something when they left this call, I would go back to where Lester started, which is, our mission statement to add as much value as possible to as many lives as possible, as soon as possible. The reality is, when we all recognize that there's already enough and we should be collaborating rather than competing, and some people can get there pretty quickly. And when they do, they want a handle to grab. They're like, well, how can I help then? You're right. I want to serve with my life. I want to support humanity. I want to add value. How can I do that? What handle do I grab? And I think that the answer to that question is really simple. It's become a prosumer of energy. Not just a consumer, but a producer of electricity. And in doing so, you will support our country and our ability to develop AI resources, which I think we're all on board. It's either going to end humanity in 10 years, or it's going to make it the best time to be alive ever.
If we have enough electricity.
Right. And so taking the time now to become a prosumer and support your own personal resilience, put a forever stamp on your cost of electricity, rather than watch the constant escalation of utility rates as AI it proliferates. That would be my suggestion. If there's somebody who was going to be enrolled in anything today, it would be become a prosumer.
Yeah, I really love that term, and I think we're gonna really elevate that, because that's the proactive stance of, just being conscious of our choices, whether it's human to human interaction or, our consumption-based choices. Those really matter. And, as we kind of wrap up today, guys, if you're listening, as I mentioned, every episode of this podcast is meant to be this handshake. And, we may not be on the same economic status or scale or have access to the same resources, but we still have voices and things that we care about, and we can build real trust in communities. And, John and Lester, thank you, because today I feel like OvaNova really reminded us that commerce, and the word that I use with exchange of value, it can't flow where there's where the lights are out, right? Energy is infrastructure, and we need to remember that it is, and energy is equity. And you already talked about that. How do we help build equity or have part of the equity in our community so that our community can go, right, as a whole? And now you're talking about it as, I love it, as a community-owned asset, and building assets and helping individuals remember that they can take part in building those assets is so important. So I just want to thank you again for coming on, breaking down some of this for the first show. We'll have you back because I definitely want to hear about some of the innovations I know you're getting ready to put out into the community. But any other closing thoughts before we wrap up today?
I always have closing thoughts.
I love it.
It just could be a lot of fun for everybody, right? Like we all want to do good, which means that we think it's possible to make the world better. Or if we don't want to do good, then we want to have more money so we can do more things for ourselves. When the truth is, do you ever remember a day you chose to stop being a kid when you said, I'm not going to play anymore. I'm not going to learn anymore. I'm not going to have fun. I'm not going to make new friends. Like, there wasn't like a conscious day when that happened, right?
Wow. No.
It's kind of like a big joke that on Happy April Fool's Day when we're recording this, but it's like the biggest joke ever that people said, you got to be an adult now because you got to be responsible. You got to work hard. When really we just wanted to keep playing. But like you said, we had to go to work to keep the lights on. So creating a world where nobody has to go to work to keep the lights on would allow us to do a lot more cool, fun stuff together. It's just almost impossible to understate how important energy is to thriving as humans. It is not a kind of nice to have. It is a must have, or else we go back to like the 1800s and we don't want that.
And many hands make light work, and a bunch of prosumers goes a long way very quickly.
Amen.
With that, John, that was a powerful statement. We're going to clip that out. We're going to elevate that wherever we can. But this was a powerful episode, and I just want to thank you again for all of the work that you and your teams are doing and for being on the show with me to talk about how we can make sure that commerce keeps happening and flowing because energy as the infrastructure allows it to do that. So thanks again.
Thanks, Connie.
Thank you for listening to Unlocking Commerce and Business. If this conversation resonated, here's what you can do. Subscribe for weekly conversations with survivors, innovators, and changemakers, building regenerative alternatives to extractive commerce. Share this episode with collaborators, partners, funders, and changemakers in your network. The people ready for restorative commerce need to hear these voices. Drop a comment below. Tell us what patterns you're recognizing or what solutions you're building. We read every one. Commerce is everywhere, and healing extraction patterns inside our communities creates regenerative commerce outside. Like a lighthouse, we're here, exploring and cutting through fog, pointing toward what works. Welcome to the era of restorative commerce. Until next time, explore courageously, build sovereignly. You are the source and store of value. This is Connie Davis signing off. Thank you for being here.
An employee's email signature might not seem like a big deal until audit season. Outdated legal language, missing disclaimers, unapproved edits. If signatures aren't centrally enforced, you cannot control regulatory exposure. And the more your organization grows, the more that exposure scales. Exclaimer is email signature management built for IT. One dashboard, centralized control, audit trails. Visit exclaimer.com to start your free trial.
Putting off replacing your window treatments because you think it's complicated? At Blinds.com, we've spent 30 years proving it doesn't have to be. And today is your last chance to save big on Spring Black Friday deals. Whether you want to DIY it or have a pro to handle everything from measure to install, we've got you. Free samples, real design experts, and zero pressure. Just help when you need it. Shop up to 45% off with minimum purchase, plus get a free professional measure during the Blinds.com Spring Black Friday Last Chance sale. Rules and restrictions apply.